This candle is heavy and it sat towards the middle of the fridge. And as soon as he closes the freezer, it lifts up and slams on the ground in front of the fridge.
It literally looked like someone had picked it straight up and dropped it straight on the ground, and it shattered everywhere.
Friends, Virginians, and countrymen, lend me your ears. Today we are back with Caanan and Ella for the rest of the story, or multiple stories in this case. The budding paranormal researchers are back to tell us a little bit more of what they've got going on since we couldn't get it all last episode. We're going to be talking a little bit about poltergeist activities, a demon who Caanan believes tried to attack him at his job, as well as a mysterious entity in a graveyard. So we get to play my favorite game called What Was in That Graveyard? Now, this is going to be our first time playing it actually on this show, but after all is said and done, I want you to go down into the comment section if you are watching on YouTube or Rumble. Let me know what you think was in that graveyard. I've got my ideas, and Caanan and Ella have theirs as well, and I'm wondering what other possibilities might be floating around out there. So let us know. Now, before we get to Caanan and Ella's interview, really quickly, I'd like to invite you, yes you, listening to this show right now, to come on the show and share your own personal stories, brushes with the divine or otherwise, within the realms of Virginia. Send us an email at oddvirginia@protonmail.com. That is oddvirginia@protonmail.com. Because here at Odd Virginia,
we're ready to believe you. Round 2.
and we are back once again with Caanan and Ella. Guys, welcome back to Odd Virginia.
Thank you.
It's good to have you on again. We were just getting to the juicy bits when we last left off on our previous episode. You guys had both been moved into the addition in Caanan's parents' house during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we saw strange black masses in the corners, as well as a possible angelic type entity or protective type entity attached to the teddy bear, and possibly a restless spirit connected to an antique desk. That was a lot of good stuff, and I was really did not want to leave off where we left off, but unfortunately time constraints are what they are, so we can pick it back up from there. What else we got going on in the addition?
All right, let's see. Oh, do you have one?
I do. I have a good one.
Okay, go for it.
So this is a couple months after we had talked to Michael and figured out, well, not really figured out, but
came to our conclusions.
Yes. That he was a guiding spirit or protective spirit. We invited Caanan's father over for dinner because his mom had gone on a little sister staycation.
Yeah, she went out with my aunt to our lake house and went and stayed with her.
Yeah. So we invited his dad over for dinner, and I made food and everything. And Caanan was getting ice out of the freezer. And our little fridge is in the very corner of our kitchen. It has a few things on top of it now, but at the time it was, I believe, just our spice rack that I set up there, and then a small candle that my little brother had gotten for my birthday. This candle is heavy. It was solid glass, pretty thick glass actually. Mm-hmm. And it sat towards the middle of the fridge, middle back on the fridge. And he opened the freezer and then closed it, but he didn't slam the freezer. And the candle jumped off the fridge is the best way I can explain it. Yeah. It literally looked, because I turned around to ask him a question, or he was asking me a question. I was answering it. Either way, I turned around and was looking at him. And as soon as he closes the freezer, it lifts up and slams on the ground in front of the fridge.
Yeah, like it flew over my head is kind of what it felt like. It was like not really like aimed at me, but it like lifted up and flew towards me a little bit, not in like it was going to hit me kind of a way, but just towards me. And my dad is the biggest non-believer that you could ever meet. Mm-hmm. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, why'd you slam the fridge? Why'd you?" And I was like, "Dad, I didn't." So our fridge is short. It's about the same height as me. So I can stand on my tippy toes and look at the top of it. And like Ella said, this candle was sat towards the center of the fridge. So even if I had moved it, there's a handle on top of the freezer part that it's like a lip, and you can stick your fingers in it to pull the door.
Yeah.
So if the candle had slipped if I had slammed the door or anything, it would have caught in that lip and fallen backwards. But if I stood on my tippy toes and looked at the top of the freezer, you could see the dust ring where the candle had sat, and it was not disturbed. It didn't slide. It didn't, move or anything. The dust ring was a perfect ring. There were no tracks or skids or anything where it had kind of wobbled or anything like that. It literally looked like someone had picked it straight up and dropped it straight on the ground, and it shattered everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
It was awful. It was so loud because this thing was probably half the glass of the candle itself is what the weight was. I mean, it was thick glass, and I mean, it shattered everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I've dropped this candle on carpet, granted, but thin carpet, and it hasn't broken, no cracks, nothing, not even a chip. And so the fact that it sounded like there was so much force put behind just dropping it was just insane. And his dad, of course, being a skeptic, misses the whole thing flying off of the fridge.
Yeah, he was really invested in that macaroni and cheese.
He really was. He did not look up from his plate until it hit the ground. And I was like, did you see that? That's what we're dealing with. And he was like, I didn't see anything. I thought he just shut the fridge too hard. I was like, are you kidding me? It flew off in front of your face, and you still don't believe. You still don't see it.
Completely missed it. Yeah. I mean, it was pretty terrifying. I didn't witness it in the same way that Ella did, because I was in the freezer and then closed it and was turning to look at her when the candle actually hit the floor. She was full on looking at it, and after the fact told me that it looked like it was flying at me. That's probably the most violent thing that's ever happened here in terms of
moving stuff,
like poltergeist type activity. That's probably as intense as it gets. I mean, we've had some doors moving, drawers rattling, stuff like that, but nothing to that degree, and nothing since then either. But it was intense. I mean, it was very terrifying.
And I felt like it was so intense because his dad was over here.
Right.
And it was like hey, I'm here because we
notice me.
Yeah, exactly. We had been telling him about my experiences and trying to get him to even open up his mind to the possibility that something else is there. And he just doesn't see it that way. He's a very logical person. He just doesn't see the possibilities.
Yeah.
And I feel like it was so intense because he was just sitting here and we were talking, and it was calm. Literally didn't feel negative in any situation, nothing. I mean, it just happened. As he turned away, was looking at me, I was staring at the fridge, and it levitated off the fridge and dropped. And I was in shock. I was like, I've never seen anything like that except in movies.
Well, and the other thing is, when it hit the ground from the bottom, because the bottom part is what shattered.
And that's usually the most solid part of a candle.
Exactly.
So the bottom part, I remember the bottom part was obviously the thickest, like you said, but it hadn't even shattered the bottom part. It was like cracked straight in the middle. And everything else was shattered. So I could still piece it back if I wanted to. I mean, it was literally dropped straight onto the bottom of the candle. I mean, it didn't tip over or anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's the crazy part is you would think if it had tipped over, it would have landed on the edge or the side or the top or something like that as it was kind of tumbling. But I mean, it was straight up and straight back down.
And that's all very classic poltergeist experiences. And I'm glad nothing like that's happened since. There are times where these things will come and go in bursts. But in my personal experience and many other people's personal experiences, they just sort of go away permanently. And I'm glad for that because I don't want things moving around my house anymore.
Right.
Amen to that.
Same. I told it to get out.
Yeah.
I was like, please, you're destroying stuff. You need to leave.
Yeah. Because Ella even said after the fact, this was after my dad left, because we weren't going to, have a conversation with thin air in his opinion, but after my dad left, we were like, Ella made the comment out in the open of like,
I made the demand
of like, we told you that we were not going to force you out of here if you respected our space. You're doing the one thing we asked you to not do, which was destroy our stuff or mess with us in this kind of a way. If you keep it up, we're getting rid of you.
And then it stopped.
And it hasn't happened since then.
Yeah, that's definitely the right course of action to take in those sorts of circumstances.
Yeah, I was very proud of her because I was petrified. I was like, I'm you can stay here if you want. I'm gonna go sleep in the tent out in the yard. I don't know what you want from me. But in terms of things that have happened here, that's about it for our house. I mean, things will happen if we invite it to. If we're talking with whatever entities might be around, or if we're inviting things to happen, then things will happen. But in terms of just unexplained experiences where, we're like, oh my gosh, what was that? It's kind of stopped, which is a good thing. It's not as exciting, but it's a good thing, that it's not happening without us being comfortable with it happening.
I will say the movement of like shutting doors or shaking things or just knocks, which we've heard multiple times. Oh, yeah. We used to get a lot of knocking, but that doesn't really happen anymore. We will hear each other's voices from other rooms, and then come out, and we'll both be in the house. Our house is not big. It's literally three rooms, living room, bathroom, and our room.
And then the closet.
And the closet.
So 4 rooms.
But we'll be in, like, say, the bathroom and the bedroom. Those are right next to each other. And like last night, he came out of the bathroom and said, "What did you say?" And I was like, "I literally didn't say anything." He was like, "No, what did you say? You just said something." And I was like, "No." And I repeated what I had said. And he said, "That was not it." And I was like, "Well, that's what I said."
Yeah.
So
that's true. So little things like that do still happen.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times I chalk that up to just normal human reactions to things. Like sometimes you just think someone said something. That's a normal human reaction to being around people. And I try to think that way as much as possible. I don't want to chalk everything up to paranormal or supernatural, because I feel like, again, going back to that egregore thing we talked about last time, I feel like if I think about it too much or believe that it is that too much, it will become that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly.
And so like Ella's parents, for instance, like I said, they're very religious. And so a lot of times they relate these kinds of things to demonic activity. Well, I try to not think that way as much as possible, for fear of inviting that kind of stuff. I certainly don't want to believe that everything is demonic or a familiar spirit, as they call it. They call them familiar spirits. I certainly don't want to believe that they're those things, because I feel like the more I do, the more it invites that kind of behavior to happen. So I try to be as logical. I try to debunk things as much as I can, but there are some times where it's like, there's no explanation for that. There's just nothing that could explain why that happened the way it did.
Yeah, and that certainly makes sense, that thinking and dwelling on certain things will cause them to manifest or invite them in, or possibly even create them in certain circumstances. And along that line of thought, with the familiars and the demons, in your initial email to me, Caanan, you had mentioned something about witnessing demonic attack. Should we go towards that?
Yeah, sure. In terms of paranormal and my experiences personally with the paranormal, this is probably the most intense time that I ever experienced something paranormal without Ella around. Because like I said, she's kind of the magnet for this stuff. I didn't really have a whole lot of experiences before I met her. So it always seems to be happening around her, but to me, if that makes sense. But this specific instance, I was entirely by myself. So to kind of set the stage, I had just graduated college. COVID was still in full swing. So I was originally going to go to graduate school, but a lot of circumstances occurred where that just wasn't possible anymore, COVID being one of them. So I was like, I'm not going to sit around on my butt and, not knowing what's going to happen with COVID and, not making anything of myself. I'm going to go out and get a job. So there was a hardware store in town in Cumberland, and I went and got a job there. I worked there for exactly 1 year. I left exactly 1 year after I started and got another job. So this was probably towards the end of my tenure there when this experience happened. So a couple days before the actual event, I had a dream. And the only thing that I saw in this dream was the face of an old woman. She was the color of ash. Her skin was ashen. I mean, like pale white, almost gray. She had like bright orange hair that was kind of glowing. It kind of had like a sheen to it that looked like kind of light was emanating from her hair. And she had electric blue eyes that were solid electric blue, no pupil or anything like that, just solid electric blue. And her teeth were the same exact color as her eyes, glowing electric blue and sharpened into points.
Yikes.
And it was absolutely terrifying. And that was all I saw in the dream. There was no sound, no movement. It was just her face smiling at me. When I woke up the next morning, I described this dream to Ella and asked her to draw a picture of it. She's a very talented artist. So I asked her to draw a picture of it. And she did. She didn't show it to me until she was completely done with it. When she showed it to me, I was like, that is exactly what I saw. So when I told her that, she folded up the picture and put it somewhere. I, to this day, 2 years later, do not know where this picture is at. I don't even know if she knows anymore. It's somewhere in our house, but I'm not going to go looking for it because I certainly don't want to see it again. It's burned into my brain enough as it is. So a couple days after I had this dream, I was working at the hardware store. I was working a closing shift. So I was at the store by myself. Our hours were 7 to 7 and it was summertime. So it was getting dark at, 4:30. So 7 o'clock is getting close. It's pitch black outside. I'm finishing stocking some shelves. So I'm off in one part of the store in an aisle where I can't see any of the rest of the store except for the end of the aisle that I'm in. And I hear the door open. We have an alarm that goes off when you open the door. We have a bell, like a motion sense bell that would go off. So I heard the bell go off, and I typically knew most of our customers who would come in that late. Like I said, small town, everybody knows everybody. So anybody who was coming in that late, I pretty much knew who they were. So I just hollered out, "Hey, I'm back here. I'll holler if you need me. Let me know if you need any help." Nobody said anything. There was no response to me saying that. I was like, okay, maybe, it's Money Mike and he's just in a bad mood today and doesn't want to talk. So I continue doing what I'm doing. I don't hear any movement or anybody rattling any shelves or anything. So I'm like, who came in? The only other thing I could think of was that it was the owner's wife. She would come in and lock the store up when I left, and she would stay and, check the cash register, do the end of day routine, run payroll, whatever she was going to do. So I thought maybe it was her. So I went back to her office to see if she was there. She was not there. So I came back out and kind of did a once over of the store just to see if there was anyone there. There wasn't anybody there. I was going to go back to doing my stocking. It was about 6:30, 6:45-ish. So we still had a little bit of time before I was going to lock the doors up. And as I'm walking back to the aisle that I was on, I noticed we had a stock room where we kept all of our, like our feed, our chicken feed or horse feed or whatever. We were a general store, farm supply. That's what we specialized in. So I was heading back to the aisle and I saw that the lights in the stock room were flickering, which to me, that was not out of the norm. We had those like fluorescent tube lights that you tie into the ballasts that hang from the from the ceiling, and they would go out all the time. And typically if one went out, the next one in the ballast would start to flicker. So I was like, okay, no big deal. I'll go back there and change the light before I leave. I get back to the stock room and none of the lights are flickering. I think there were 3 ballasts in the stock room. Every single one of them was on. No bulbs were out. I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. So I stood there for a second to see if it would start flickering again. Nothing happened. I was like, all right, that's weird. So I locked the back door that was in the stock room, was coming out to head back to the front door to lock it up. Because at this point I was getting a little freaked out. I mean, not to the point of like, oh my gosh, something's trying to attack me, but I was getting a little spooked. So I was heading back up to the front door to lock it. And next to the front door was our display of long handle garden tools. So rakes, shovels, hose, that kind of stuff. And they were hanging from hooks in the display. As I'm walking to the door, I look over and I see that they're shaking, like someone had come over and kind of run their hand over them like chimes, and they were swinging. But it wasn't just like one rack, like, someone had bumped it or the air conditioner was blowing on it or whatever. It was like 3 or 4 rows of these tools were swaying. And I was like, okay, that is absolutely freaky. And so I started hearing noises from the back corner of the shop where we kept like our nuts and bolts and stuff like that. And at this point I was like, okay, this is way too much. I can't do this. So I called Ella and was telling her what was going on as these things were happening. But it was like every time something would happen in one side of the store, something else would happen at the complete opposite end. It was like it was running me back and forth across the store, like it was taunting me or whatever. Playing with me. So I called Ella and I was telling her what all was going on. And I started muttering under my breath, Vade retro Satana, which is Latin for turn back Satan. It was a kind of, not really an exorcism, but kind of a Latin incantation that was used as, a phrase to turn back demons.
I was about to ask where you learned that, but then I remember that you study medieval history.
Exactly. That is exactly where I learned it from. Was, in my classes talking about church history and stuff like that. And so that's how I learned that. And I don't know if, that phrase had any kind of power or if it was, again, me manifesting or if it was just a comfort thing, just being able to say something that I felt like might have had some sort of effect on the situation. But things started to kind of calm down a little bit. I mean, but the whole time that I'm in the store, it felt like I was being followed or at least watched. But it was all around me. It wasn't like a single person was behind me or whatever. It was all around me throughout the store. And then as I'm talking to Ella, muttering the Latin under my breath, then the owner's wife finally showed up and I was able to leave because I always had to wait for her to get there before I could leave. And I mean, as soon as she got there, I was like, hey, Sue, nice to see you. I got to go. And I walked out the door and went home. But before she got there, everything just started to feel so much more intense. As I stopped saying the incantation and got off the phone with Ella, things just started to feel so heavy and intense, like something bad was about to happen. And, it's kind of like that moment in a horror movie when the music's ramping up and then right before you think a jump scare is about to happen, someone walks in the door or whatever and everything's calm again. It was exactly like that. Like that feeling of anxiety, like as soon as this moment reaches its peak, something bad is going to happen. And right at that moment is when the owner's wife walked in the door and I was able to leave. But I got home and I told Ella, I was like, I think that whatever I saw in my dream just tried to attack me at work.
Yeah. It's oddly coincidental that you dream that and then it happens.
Right.
Yeah. And so I started doing research about demonic entities, and not just in Christian religion, but, in all the Abrahamic faiths, all, Zoroastrianism, Mesopotamian religions, just any kind of anything I could find that related to what I saw and what I felt at the store. I found one supposedly female demon from an ancient Mesopotamian branch of faith that kind of fit with what was going on, but nothing fit the description of what I saw in my dream. So I could never really figure out what it was doing. And there have been moments since then where I have felt the same presence, but not to the same intensity of what happened at that store. And it was kind of after that moment that I really started to get, solidly back into my faith. Because before that, I was kind of going through a similar thing to what Ella had gone through earlier in her life, where, I was just kind of doubting not so much the Christian religion, but Christians themselves, people who would, say, this is the way, I know how it is, listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of got fed up with that of, so many people following this religion because someone else told them to, not based on their own interpretations or the real history of it. And, studying medieval history kind of led into that a little bit too, because you see a lot of these, especially pagan religions, Norse paganism or Germanic paganism being a very heavy influence on modern Christianity.
Yeah.
I would just be like, how can these people see these things and not make these connections? But then I kind of started, especially after that, rationalizing in my head, a lot of that stuff is not important to the religion itself or your own personal faith. A lot of that is just humans finding ways to celebrate, or, Christmas for me was a big thing. I would always be like, how in the world do holly leaves and a big Germanic white man with a beard have anything to do with a Middle Eastern religion?
Yeah.
It was always hard to kind of rationalize that. But especially after that moment of what happened at the store, I was like, none of that matters. That's all just human stuff. That doesn't matter to what's really going on and the battles that people face and stuff like that. None of that other stuff matters.
Absolutely.
So I got really strong in my faith again after that incident. And since then, nothing like that has happened to me. Like I said, I've certainly felt the presence again before, but never so oppressively to the point that it was that night.
Yeah, I'm glad that it worked out that way for you, because some people, when they come to religion or come to God, they start becoming oppressed. They feel like something's actually coming to try to take them back from the light, from the salvation. But in other cases, just like in yours, it's more like you've been wrapped in the armor, or have some sort of angelic presence around you, sort of keeping these things at bay.
Right.
And that's definitely the preferred outcome, I'd say. That's the better of the two.
It really is.
I mean, especially, when you're someone who has seen the things that we've seen or faced the things that we've faced, and you realize the power that you have available to you to fight these things off or prevent them from happening to you, it leads you to this point of none of the rest of it matters. All I know is what kept me safe in that moment. And that's what's important to me. There's a bigger picture to look at here than to nitpick all of the little intricacies of a religion or of whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. There's a bigger picture to look at here.
Many people will ask, if God is benevolent, then why would he allow something like a demonic attack or oppression or even possession to happen to a person? And I think that's the answer right there, is to show you that there's two sides to this coin, and it's up to you where you want to go.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's how we feel completely.
Yep, we agree 100%. We have these conversations amongst ourselves all the time, and we always end up coming to that same conclusion of like, the reason that evil exists and the reason that there's pain and suffering and sickness is to make you realize how worth it all the rest of it is. I think that both of us kind of had to go through that period of questioning and of, self-doubt alongside of, religious doubt and doubting our parents or what, we just had to go through that period to understand, oh, wow, there's a side of this that most people will never even experience. Most people will never have to go through the things that a lot of us go through to be able to understand how important it is and how useful it is. I mean, I think that had I not come to that realization, had I not been, using the Latin, and even if the Latin was just kind of an anchor point to get me to that, that point of faith where it's like, at this point, it's out of my hands. There's nothing else I can do. If it hadn't been for that, who knows what might have happened to me, whether it be possession or bodily harm or whatever. Something really bad could have happened to me if I hadn't been in that state of mind that I was in, and had the knowledge to be able to say, hey, I know that for some people, this is what works. Let me try it. Oh, hey, it worked for me.
Yeah.
I've always had this feeling that the main goal for these things, the majority of the time, is literally just to invoke a fear response. I feel like they get off on that, possibly gain something from it. What, I'm not sure. Whether they're feeding and gathering that sort of frightful energy, or are trying to break you down in order to get more of a foothold into your life. I think really the reason that things will move on their own, or you'll hear whispers from another room, is just to make you scared so that they can feed off of that.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say to bring us into our next story that just popped into my head, that they will look for a chink in the armor, if you will. They'll do anything to get into your mind and have you doubt anything you're saying or be afraid of what they're saying because they possibly could know something, even if they don't scientifically have a consciousness. So the next little story I have happened, was either, I think, earlier this year or last year around the same time. So beginning of the summer. And we were at my mom's house, and Caanan and I somehow got her to say yes to a Estes method and investigation.
We actually have videos of this happening.
Yeah.
So this is one of we always find ourselves in situations where like things will happen and we'll be like, shoot, why didn't we record that?
Why do we have cameras?
But this we actually have on video.
Yeah.
So this story gets really crazy.
And I will put a trigger warning for whoever is going to listen to your podcast. This one is kind of a really sad story towards the end, but we were doing an Estes method in my old room, which is now my little sister's room, because my little sister has heard the same things I used to hear, like the footsteps or the voices or the floorboards creaking when no one's standing there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's heard them all. So it's kind of nice to have that validating, like she's heard them as well. And I'm not crazy. And
that kind of leads to the point of it's not attached to you. It's attached to the house because she's experienced the same exact things without Ella having ever been there. But anyway, go ahead.
But we were in her room and we were like, let's just do an Estes method. My mom wanted to join. She wanted to ask questions, see how it worked. So Caanan went under first. He put the headphones on and we gave him a scarf, I think, as a blindfold. And he just kind of was rocking back and forth to the rhythm of the spirit box. And so since we were in the same room, we were kind of whispering our questions so that he couldn't hear us. And we just were immediately getting like roundabout answers. They weren't really connecting in any way. And this went on for about 30 minutes. But we were still getting responses, I would say, but they weren't to our question. So I wouldn't really consider it evidence, if that's the correct word.
Not direct answers.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we said goodbye, ended the session. We talked about it, looked over the video, and he was like, yeah, I heard a lot of Spanish. Don't know why. And I was like, me neither. I wasn't speaking in Spanish.
Right.
So then I was like, well, let me give it a shot because weird stuff always happens to me. So I go under as well. And probably 2 minutes into the session, immediately it feels like something is sitting on my shoulders and like pressing my face down into my lap. I'm sitting on the bed cross-legged for reference. And it's just like so heavy. And so I just keep leaning forward because I'm like, there's got to be relief somewhere. My back is straining. And they're asking questions, and I just keep hearing mommy in the background. And so I'm saying it out loud. And I look up really quick to look at my mom because I was like, it said mommy. Why would it say mommy? She has no other children, right? And she starts to look kind of panicked. And so I go close my eyes again, and she starts asking questions. And all I hear is mommy, mama, mom, mommy. And it's just like over, and over. And I think it was trying to mimic a stillborn my mom had before she had me. And I think it was trying to get that chink in her armor because she's very religious. So she's a very strong woman. And these things, she doesn't scare very easy. And it was just picking and picking and picking. And it targeted her. It didn't say anything, as far as I'm aware, looking at the video, related to any of the questions Caanan was asking.
Yeah.
And I think not only was it using me because I was her child, but it was also trying to mimic what her other child would have been like.
Yep.
And so she had to call the session because she started to cry.
Yeah. Because she started to kind of like get into it and was like, are you my son?
Yeah.
Are you the one that I lost? And it was answering in a way like it was. And she kind of snapped at it and was like, we need to stop because
I know that's not it.
That's not him. It can't be him. There's no way.
He's with God. I mean, there's no possible way he's here.
Yeah. And so she was like, this is something that's trying to get at me by attacking my most sensitive part.
Yep. Hitting the sore spot right there.
Exactly.
And so I find that every time I've stopped doing the Estes method because I find that every time I'm under, negative responses come through, whether it's towards me, it's never towards Caanan as far as I'm aware, but whether it's towards me or my mom, it's always women. There's something around me that when I go under into this method, that it's just angry that I am talking to it or trying to communicate or trying to be a conduit for it.
Yeah.
It's just pissed off. And I'm like, I don't understand your issue.
Right.
That's a very interesting observation.
Yeah. I mean, it's every time. So I don't do it at all anymore because I get so drained and I immediately have to take an Advil or something because I have a migraine. I mean, my neck starts to hurt. And so I just start praying afterwards because it's like, it's just so heavy.
Yeah, that is an extremely heavy story. And you're right. That was incredibly sad.
Yeah.
Halfway through, I felt like I knew where it was going and I was just hoping it wasn't going there.
Yeah.
And then it was.
Yeah, that's why I kind of wanted to say trigger warning at first, just in case.
Yeah.
You know.
Good idea.
Sorry. But that was, I think for my mom, the most negative or like most emotional session she's ever had. It was also her first, I think. First
and last, like legit, where it was just her.
Her, yeah.
You know, any other time, especially after the fact, you know, because that was right around the time that they started to really open up to being investigatory and kind of trying to communicate with this other side of things instead of just writing it off or whatever the case may be, you know. And for that to be the first experience that she has in a direct conversation or in a direct investigation, I think that really affected her. So ever since then, if she's participating, we're always in a group, and she's always kind of more supportive than she is directly involved. You know, she's not the one so much asking the questions or, you know, going to debunk things or looking for evidence or whatever. She's just kind of more there for support, so to speak. Whereas I would say, especially recently within the last probably 4 or 5 months, Ella's dad and then Ella and I, the three of us have been really into investigating, trying to,
find answers,
specifically in relation to this one space, which we touched on a little bit last episode, the Revolutionary Cemetery.
Okay.
So I didn't know about it until this year. So at one point, Ella had gone over to her parents and I had stayed home. Her and her dad and her mom went to this cemetery. So the way that it's set up, if you're going to Cartersville, there's, you're going down the road and the road kind of forks to the entrance of the village, or you can keep going down the main road and it'll take you to the bridge to go over the river. Well, right at that fork, there's an old trading post, which I think is just used for storage now. And if you're coming to the village, on the right side of the road is a general store. On the left side of the road is a field with an old house in the middle of the field. As far as I know, it's not occupied. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it's not. Someone owns it, but they don't live there. It's just historic value, basically.
Okay. And so if you go through the field behind the house, probably about a half mile behind the house, is the cemetery. So they went to the cemetery, the three of them, without me there. I didn't even know that they had gone to the cemetery until later that night, because Ella hadn't come home yet and she hadn't texted me or called me. And she had a car accident last fall. And so ever since then, we've shared our location with each other in case something like that happens again. We're able to find each other. So she hadn't texted or called. So I checked her location just to make sure that she was still at her parents and everything was okay. And I saw that she was in the middle of the woods. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is she doing? So, I mean, I didn't bug her then because I didn't know what all was going on, but I could see, she was in the middle of the woods, but it was a live feed. Apple recently had that update where it does live feeds of your location. So I could see that it was like moving around. So I was like, okay, she's alive. She's alive. She has her phone on her. So like if something was wrong, she would have texted or called, or her parents would have. So I was like, okay, this is cool. She gets back home that night and tells me they went to the cemetery. And at first I was a little upset. I was like, what? Y'all went without me? Whatever. So I think it was either that same week, maybe that weekend, or the next week.
I think it was the week after.
The week after.
We had gone.
So that next weekend, the two of us go to her parents' house. And, we're hanging out, eating dinner, whatever.
My dad gets the itch to go.
Yeah. So we're getting ready to pack up to leave. And he's like, oh, are y'all leaving? We were like, yeah, it's getting late. We're going to head home. He was like, I was going to take you guys over to the cemetery. I immediately dropped my bags and was like, let's go. We walk down the street, out of the village, down the road to where the house is at. We go into the field where the house is. And immediately, as soon as you cross, they have these 4 brick pillars that line the front of, I guess, where the property line is for the house, to separate the road to the house. As soon as you cross over those pillars and you're on the other side of them, it's tangible. The feeling of, whoa, this is different. You can tell. I mean, it's intense. So we're walking down the road, down the little path to where the cemetery is. And they've had their own experiences with the first time that they came over. And Ella's dad is kind of telling us, what he experienced the last time he was over there and all this stuff. So we're walking down toward the cemetery. Once you get past the house, maybe another 50 or 75 yards behind the house, there's a line of trees with a break in them. The break is where the path continues down to the cemetery. But you have trees lining either side. As soon as you get to that point is when things started to happen. Mm-hmm. So we got to that point in the break in the trees, and it opens up into this huge field. During the day, you'd be able to see the cemetery from that point. And like I said, it's about another half mile, maybe a little bit less from that point onto the cemetery. So it opens up into this huge field. I think they'd been doing some logging on the far side beyond the cemetery. So you can kind of see the sky a little bit beyond the trees. But as soon as we get to that point, we see a light just kind of, from what we could see, it was kind of flickering or coming on and coming off. We couldn't really tell if the light itself was coming on and coming off, or if it was just from us walking and our position changing, that the light was getting hidden behind trees and branches and stuff, that it looked like it was flickering. So, but we keep seeing this light, and all three of us can see it. So Ella's dad pulls out his camera to see if he can record it. So some of the pictures that he takes and some of the videos he takes, you can see the light. Some of them you can't, but we could see it with our eye, with our naked eye. We could still see it, even though the camera wouldn't pick it up. So that was a little odd to us, but we're in the boonies, and there's a lot of hunters around. Lots of people use trail cams. We didn't know if maybe it was kind of like IR light, something like that. We didn't pay too much attention to it. So we continued walking, keeping an eye out for more lights or anything like that. And Ella's dad has a spirit box going while we're doing this. And, it's steady talking. I mean, it's saying some things that are kind of creepy, but nothing that is really like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it said that. It's just saying some random words, some that might be kind of connected, like, I was shot, or, I died here, or, things like that. But we're walking towards a cemetery. So those kinds of things are to be expected. Nothing that really jumped out at us that was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened. So we continue walking down. We get to the cemetery, and the cemetery is ringed by a brick wall. There's no opening in the brick wall. There's no gate. There's no arch, nothing. It's just ringed by the wall. If you wanted to get in to look at the actual graves, you would have to hop the wall.
Is it tall?
No, it's a low wall. I would say maybe 2 feet tall, 2.5 feet tall, knee height, I would say. So, very easy to get into. It's not made to keep anybody out or anything like that. It's just there as kind of a protective, hey, this is the cemetery. This is the plot of land that was, assigned for the cemetery. These are the people that are buried here. Just kind of a signifying wall of this is the area you're in.
And is the cemetery maintained regularly?
So the area around the cemetery is, yes. From what I could tell, the grass was a little bit taller inside the wall, but the area around it was obviously regularly bush hogged. The grass was cut, rolled over. You could tell there'd been tractor tires and everything like that. So obviously whoever owned the land had bush hogged that field, but the grass itself was tall around the graves from what I remember. So we get back there. The first time that Ella and her parents went, Ella's dad had hopped the wall to look at the graves in detail. And there was a little bit more daylight out when they went the first time. So he was able to kind of see the graves, see the names, the dates, epitaphs, stuff like that. When we went, it was pitch black. We had to use flashlights to get to where we were going. We could not see anything with the naked eye. And it was a cloudy night as well. So there wasn't a whole lot of moonlight. Couldn't see any stars or anything like that. Very cloudy night. So we get down there, and nothing is really happening once we get to the actual cemetery. So I start kind of trying to drum up some activity. I don't really believe in the aggressive approach, taunting or provoking. I try not to do that because I find that if you do that, you invite the wrong kinds of interactions. And even if it's not then in that moment, you might experience some things later that you did not want to experience. So I tend to avoid the provoking, aggressive approach. But I did want to kind of drum up some activity. So I knew that the one thing that always responded to me, especially in Cartersville, was Alice Harrison. So I brought her up, and I asked if she was with us, if she'd followed me. We started to get some responses. None that necessarily connected directly to Alice. It was just odd that when I brought her up, we started to get activity. And Ella might be able to fill in some blanks here because I don't really remember all of the words that came through on the spirit box. The only thing that I remember specifically before the event that I'm about to tell you about occurred was it was conjured. That was the word that jumped out, that stuck with me. That was absolutely terrifying. And I will also say that it was conjured was said in a different voice than any other voice we'd gotten all night long.
Yeah, it was a creepy
kind of
phrase.
Guttural.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Very unpleasant.
Very.
It sounds like it.
Before that phrase, though, there were a couple of words that didn't really match anything, except for the Alice Harrison name. I mean, it was obviously a space where soldiers were back in the day, and like a lot of them lived here, had families here, never got to come back here except to be buried.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also worth mentioning that this cemetery had Harrisons buried in it.
It did have a couple of Harrisons buried in it, and it also had a couple of deans who owned the property originally.
But just to be clear, this was a Revolutionary War cemetery, right? Not a Civil War.
So there were members of the family buried there from the founding of Cartersville to, I think the latest grave was 1897.
I think so. So it kind of spanned quite a few years.
Yeah. But of course, it's a family cemetery, so it's still very small. But it did span a number of years. I think the latest grave, I believe, was 1774. I think. I'm not 100% positive. I think the latest grave was 1774, and I think the most recent, I think, was 1897.
Okay, so people were being put in there over 100-year period.
Yeah. Correct. And we weren't getting like aggressive answers. It was just like coming home. I think it said soldiers at one point, and so we started asking about the soldiers, and then it said we're coming home, and then it started to progressively get more intense, and so we had a bunch of be quiet, hush, stops.
It's around you.
It's around you. It said we see you at one point, and then the last one that was so burned into our brains was it was conjured. And I would like to say a little bit before we actually got to the graveyard, I was very hesitant to go any further. I stopped about 20 feet away from the graveyard itself because it just felt like a wall was in front of me. And I feel energies a lot of the time. I'm very sensitive to those things. And so I was telling my dad, I was like, I will not go further. I don't want to go further. This is as far as I'm going. I mean, in his brain, it's like, we're right there. Why not?
Yeah. We walked all this way.
Right,
Come on.
exactly. And in my head, I'm like, it's telling me not to go further. I cannot go further. So I stayed right there as they wandered off a little bit. And then I hesitantly followed because I didn't want to be by myself. Yeah. I felt, again, like I was being hunted. Like something was there watching me. I
mean, the whole time that we're walking down here, Ella's like,
I don't like it.
Yeah. And she's saying like, there's something over there, or
I can hear it to my side. I mean, there's rustling, and obviously we're in the woods, but we have our lights on and there are no bugs, which is weird. One, and it was warm out that night. So there should have been bugs. There weren't any. The rustling came from all around. It wasn't like birds. It wasn't squirrels. I mean, everything was asleep as far as I was aware. We didn't see any deer at all.
I mean, it definitely felt like we were being stalked. Like something was like kind of mirroring our steps.
Yes.
And so like, as we would walk, it would walk. As we would stop, it would stop.
And I, at some points, was the only person noticing and hearing it. So I would stop before everybody else. And I would be like, what was that? Do you see that? What is that?
Yeah.
And like point out where the sounds are relatively coming from. And so we get further, and about 20 feet away from the graveyard is when we start asking the questions, and I'm standing there by myself. And my dad and Caanan come back over to me from checking out the graveyard for a moment, and something in the bushes very close to me, to my left, rustled. So I quickly flashed my light over there low, because I don't, if it's a person, I don't want to blind them and then possibly get shot. But I do it low because it sounded like it came lower from the ground, like a rabbit or something. So I'm looking in the bushes, no leaves are moving, there's no wind going, and it doesn't move any further. And so they're standing there with me, and we get the phrase, "It was conjured." And then as soon as that phrase comes up, maybe like 30 seconds later, we hear the wind pick up, and then a massive log just falls from the sky.
It's kind of what it sounded like. So it sounded to me, and this is what I told Ella in the moment, because I'm trying to keep her calm. I could tell she's freaking out. And me and her dad, we're both outdoorsy kind of guys. We like to hike, and that's kind of our wheelhouse. So we hear this noise. To me, it sounds like the wind picked up a little bit and a branch fell out of a tree and just kind of crashed to the ground. And so Ella was like, "What was that?" And I was like, "It was just the wind." And Ella's dad was like, "The wind's not blowing that hard."
Even my dad was like, "No, it wasn't."
And he's not easily frightened. I mean, he is a bear of a man.
Yeah.
I mean, he is a tough SOB. And he was like, "No, it wasn't." So we're standing there as she hears this noise, and Ella's dad is like, "All right." So the way that the woods are set up, there's a clearing off to our left, and the woods kind of make a crescent shape around the clearing and then jut out towards us. So where we're standing is at the apex of that jut. And it's a lot of brush and then some trees and everything like that. And then the clearing arcs away in the opposite direction from us. So Ella's dad is like, "I'm going to walk to the other side of these trees to get a look at the clearing, because whatever that was would have come from that direction. Maybe it's walking back, if it's a thing." As soon as he starts to take steps, Ella's like, "I'm not staying here by myself, so I'm coming with you." As soon as we all start to move, something huge
starts to rush us.
I mean, barreling towards us. And like I said, Ella's dad is not an easily frightened man.
He is the most stoic and brave and not terrified person I've ever met in my life. He does not scare easy. And he was frightened. He was like, "I've been in the woods all my life. Never heard anything like this before."
Yeah.
And it literally sounded like if I, okay. So we're going to get a little weird for a second. It literally.
Let's get weird.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm down.
It literally sounded like if you could imagine Bigfoot, it sounded like something that massive running at us with no lights, blindly, just towards our voices.
Yeah. I mean,
and it was crushing on everything it possibly could.
What we said in the moment after we got out of there and back to the road, what it sounded like was a fat man had gotten lost in the woods and was running towards us, stomping through the leaves and everything, trying to get to people. Now, here's what's crazy, because so Ella's dad is a Bigfoot guy. That's like his thing. He loves to talk about Bigfoot and stuff like that. And so that's kind of where his mind jumps to, is, some sort of cryptid or something like that. Well, his first instinct, as we're kind of, I say slowly, like speed walking, it's not slow, but we're not running either. As we're kind of trying to get away from there, his first instinct is to pull out his flashlight
and shine it.
He's got one of those super bright, like 6,000 lumen, whatever flashlights. And he takes it out of his pocket and he flashes it into the woods where we heard the noise from. And what's crazy is we can hear it run towards us and then it stops. It doesn't run in the opposite direction. It doesn't, keep coming towards us. It just stops. But where we heard it stop at was the edge of the woods. So he takes his flashlight out and he shines it. Had it been any kind of animal or anything physical, you would have seen eye shine or, reflections of fur. You would have seen something because the woods had kind of thinned by that point. It was more so in the brush. You would have seen something.
At least how it sounded so big.
Yeah.
There would have been something moving. Nothing was moving. And as we are speed walking, I am frantically going faster, but also watching my dad because when he starts running, I start running.
Yeah.
And so he's got his light on the tree line. And I mean, it's still moving with us as we're moving away. But we can't see anything. And he put his body basically between ours and told us to go faster. And he was just shining it, walking backwards, mind you, which is not safe on a dirt path.
Yeah, keeping his eyes on the woods while me and Ella got out of there.
And I mean, he was freaked out. He was like, did anybody record that? He was like freaked out, but excited at the same time because he's never had something like this happen to him. So he was so freaked out. But
lots of excited.
Yeah, it was just like, did you record that? Did anybody get that? Did we take pictures? Did we do this? Did we do that? Did you hear that? And I was like, freeze. Whoa, hold on. We could have died just now.
Yeah. So I started recording after we had started to run away. That's when I started recording just in case something else happened or it kept following us or whatever. But once we got out of the direct parallel of the jut, once we were like on the clearing side, it stopped moving. I mean, and it never moved again. It didn't come across the clearing. It didn't go back to where it was. It just stopped. Like it had disappeared.
Yeah. Evaporated.
I'd recorded that point onwards. And you just hear a lot of like panting and screaming and did anybody get that? That's kind of all you get out of my recording. So it's not very useful, but I mean, you can hear how freaked out all of us are.
Frantic and excited at the same time.
So we get back to the line of trees heading back towards the house. And once we got to the point of beyond the tree line back on the house side, things started to calm down a little bit. It didn't feel as heavy. So we started to slow our pace and walk back. When we got to the pillars, we kind of like stopped moving, just tried to collect ourselves, kind of go over what just happened, try to rationalize it. As we're standing there, we see a light off in the woods to our left. So this is on the opposite side of the village. To our right is the village and the road heading back to the village. To our left is the tree line, the rest of the field, then the tree line, and then the rest of the road to go back towards Cumberland proper, away from the river. So we're standing there at the pillars. We see this light off in the field towards the tree line. And it looks to us like a headlamp, like a person wearing a headlamp. And it's like bobbing like someone walking. The only problem is the distance between where we were and where that light was. If it had been a person wearing a headlamp, the light should have been a lot bigger. It was a very small light, very reminiscent of a firefly, but its movement was nothing like a firefly. Then all of a sudden it blinked out. Then it blinked back up, but it was 15 or 20 feet away from where it was before within a span of 5 seconds. Yeah. Way faster than anything should have been able to move. And it did that for a good 10 or 15 minutes. And I do believe I have some recording of it if I can find it.
Yeah, if you could find that and get that to me, that'd be awesome. I would love to put a link up to that in the show notes for this episode, if you can find it.
I think I have it. If I don't have it, I think Ella's dad does. I will certainly get with him and see if he can send me. So he's also gone back by himself, which we've told him not to do. He needs to wait for us. Mm-hmm. But he refuses. He's very stubborn. We love him anyway.
Yeah. But he told me that he's very into the cryptid topic. And shout outs to Bill, by the way, Ella's dad. He actually emailed me before you guys got a hold of me, and he and I seem to be kind of in the same line of thinking. particular instance, I think you had a Sasquatch encounter.
See, that's okay. He's going to get so giddy about you saying that. That's literally the only explanation we have.
Yeah.
I mean, just nothing living is that massive to sound that large. I don't even think a bear would sound like that.
That was my thought, was that it was in my logical trying to debunk things. My thought was it was a bear, but like I said, I've been in the woods my whole life. Bears don't act that way. They're not going to charge towards you and then stop. If you're threatening them and they decide they're going to charge towards you, they're not going to stop until you're gone, till you're dead, you know?
Yeah.
Or until they've chased you off and know you're not a threat.
Usually they go the other way.
Yeah.
Exactly. The typical response of any animal, if you get too close and you're not threatening them or their young, is they're running away. They're not running towards you.
Yeah.
So if it was a bear, it was the dumbest bear I've ever encountered in my entire life.
Right.
But it sounded way bigger than any bear I've ever heard.
And like we said, it just kind of evaporated. Like it didn't, because it was quiet that night. And actually, after we had left the clearing area, the wind had died off. I mean, it was not windy. It was just when we were in that space when all of that was happening. It was just straight chaos. And once we leave the clearing, there's absolutely no more sounds. Nothing digging, nothing walking away. I mean, not even breathing that you can hear. So, I mean, I can only think and indulge my dad that it was a Bigfoot encounter of some sort.
Here's where I draw the parallels. First of all, you said there was a light as you're approaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Very common. Second, there was the no insect noises on a balmy summer night.
Yeah.
It was also very common. The limb or log falling down out of the tree when it shouldn't have, also very common. Something bluff charging you or pacing you, even if you can't see it as close as it gets, super common. Like all these things really line up. And then there was the little tiny orb light that sort of streaked across.
Yeah.
These are all things that are very, very, very common in conjunction with Sasquatch experiences. So I feel like maybe this thing just didn't want you in its territory. Now, the one thing that doesn't line up is when you were using the spirit box and something said it was conjured. Where are you going to go if you're an edgy teenager who wants to do some conjuring magic on Halloween night? You're going to go to a graveyard.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I feel like something may be connected there, but I don't know how or why.
So we might have a connection for the conjured part.
But we're not entirely positive.
Yeah. And so I'm going to leave out some details for people's privacy. I don't want to offend anybody or have anybody think of anything of people. But earlier that day, Ella and I had gone to an event in Cumberland. And at this event, there was some, praying going on. Obviously very religious community that we're in, small town in the South, typical. Mm-hmm. However, there was a lot of pagan religion influences far beyond the norm in Christianity. Doing things like using words that are not typical in Christianity, that upon doing further research have some kind of magical or mystical connotations in these other religions. Performing kind of rituals that are not typically ascribed to Christian rituals. Praying to ancestors, asking for ancestor spirits to protect you or whatever. All these things that are not very common in traditional Christianity being blended into this, kind of Christian motif for this event that we attended. We were not prepared for these kinds of things to be happening at this event when we went. And we both got very uncomfortable when these things started to happen. Now, what's strange about this is this event took place at a certain institution of which there is a twin in Cartersville. So these two institutions were opened at the same time. One that we went to earlier in the day. There's another one in Cartersville that were opened in conjunction with each other. So upon us leaving Cartersville that night, we went by, in order for us to get home, we have to pass this second institution. When we go by, the parking lot is loaded with cars.
I mean, packed full, bumper to bumper.
Yes. And there are no lights on. There are no people outside. There's no people inside. The whole building was illuminated with red light. Blood red light.
Yeah.
But you could not see any shadows of people. You couldn't see anyone walking around. Nothing. And this building has a lot of windows on it. And to see all of those cars in the parking lot, but not see anybody that should have been driving those vehicles anywhere near the vicinity was very odd to us.
And
that's ominous.
Yeah.
Very.
And mind you, we're leaving my parents' house around midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So we're passing this place 1 o'clock in the morning, bright blood red lights illuminating the inside of this building, and a small parking lot packed full of cars. I mean, there had to have been at least 50 cars there.
And this parking lot is probably optimized for 20, maybe 30 cars. So it was overly packed. And you had some people parking in the grass, and it was a lot of people there.
And so we kind of, after we got that last message and then we got chased out of the area we were originally in, we kind of put two and two together, but we're not positive. It was conjured, and then we passed a illuminated building with red lights and like no people at all. And it was just a very strange string of events.
Right. To go from what we experienced earlier in the day to then what we experienced that night in the graveyard, to at the same time as we're leaving, see a building that's connected to the place we were at earlier in the day, have this weird thing be going on, and none of these cars were there when we went by to go to her parents' house. So they were all there sometime after we got to her parents' house, more than likely at the same time that we're in the graveyard.
I would say, because I think we went over there around 7 for dinner.
Yeah, we went over to her parents around 7. We went out to the graveyard probably around 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Man, that is super spooky. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm getting creeped out just hearing about it. I don't even live it's like an hour drive to get over to you guys, and I'm still freaked out by it.
Yeah,
It was absolutely terrifying. So we didn't even put two and two together until we were going down the road after we had passed this other building that was connected to the first one that we were at earlier in the day.
We were like, oh, that's weird.
Then I was like, wait, didn't the spirit box say it was conjured? So then it starts to get really creepy. A couple days after, I'm still doing research. This is like, bothering me really bad. What in the world could have been going on? So I'm doing some research into the words that were used earlier in the morning, some of the rituals that were done and what they kind of connotate in the actual religion itself. And some of the entities that are tied to that religion. Well, one of them, so the light that we saw in the woods, we thought it was a firefly, but it was way too early for fireflies to be out. And there was only one. We never saw another firefly. It was just the one. And it followed us all throughout the whole, experience in the graveyard, coming out, going back into the village. There's another field up above on the hill in the village, where if you go through the field and through the woods, it's directly in front of the graveyard. This light followed us all the way over there.
Yeah.
And so we kept thinking it was a firefly or firefly-like. That's all we could liken it to. Well, in doing research about this religion, there's a certain entity. It's basically like a vampire. It's a witch that can take the form of a firefly to stalk its prey and absorb their life force. That's tied specifically to this religion that the influences were brought into during these events that we went to earlier in the day.
Yeah. So we definitely think something was conjured, maybe not knowingly, but through passed down teachings to others. They just unknowingly did it because it's what they were taught and what they've practiced. And I think that's a really huge part of what we experienced that night. Maybe towards the end, I wouldn't say the whole rush part, but
no, I think that whatever rushed us, I honestly think that might have actually been separate from.
Absolutely.
I think the thing that was quote unquote conjured was the light that we were seeing after the fact.
For sure.
Is what I think. But just to be able to put all these pieces together after the fact, it's not like we're seeing the stuff happening and we already know this information and we're assigning it to the events that are happening. We experience the events, and then in doing research, we find these bits and pieces that are adding up to like, oh my gosh, this makes total sense.
Mm-hmm. And we're people that's, yeah. I mean, we're people that are like heavily based on research. We're very spiritual, but we're also very logical.
Yeah.
So if something isn't adding up right in the moment, we go home and do research. And if we can't find anything, then we're like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
But if we find something, it's like, okay, well, this could be explained or this might have happened. Then we go with the more logical answer before anything else, really. Especially with, certain events where we're being rushed in the middle of the woods or seeing one random itty bitty light that has jumped 15 feet at a time within 2 seconds, and stuff like that, or just noises in general. I mean, a lot of it we have to do research on, or else we'll overthink it.
Definitely one of them.
One of them for sure.
Definitely one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably one of the most intense ones for me, where I was with other people.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. We've, had experiences separately, especially alone. And it's like, okay, well, I can go back and tell anybody any story I want. They have no reason to believe me.
Right.
But what happened that night can be corroborated between 3 different people. We all experienced the same exact thing.
All witnessed it, all have the same story. I mean, it doesn't change.
Yeah. So I would say that alone puts it at the top because we didn't experience it alone.
And you're not crazy if you experience it together.
Exactly.
Well, guys, it looks like we're running into our allotted time again. But it's been an absolute honor to have you here to share your stories with us. I loved every single bit of it. And it sounds like you guys, I mean, really, really have some pretty crazy stuff. But you are also very logical about it and well-researched, which I appreciate all of that. So thank you for coming on. I was going to ask you before we go, if there's anything that you might want to promote that's going on in your personal life, any sort of like businesses or really anything you want to share.
Oh, wow.
I mean, not really, I don't think. I mean,
we are trying to start up our own paranormal investigation group.
Yeah.
Cool.
Called Bright.
Yeah. So Bright stands for the Bureau of Research and Investigation into Ghostly Hauntings and the Transcendental.
So it's very long.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, Bright's better.
Yeah, exactly.
As far as saying it out.
So we're trying to get that started, but it's going to be a little difficult.
Yeah. I mean, we're both very busy people and we don't have a whole lot of time to dedicate, and but we would like to, especially with all the experiences that we have, we want to be able to document it and show people all of the things that, we've seen and experienced and just how crazy some of this stuff can really get.
Yeah, well, I'll encourage you to do as much as you can. I know life gets in the way, but it doesn't have to be 24/7. Just do what you can. Start out small and keep on working at it. And you'll see if it's something that you really want to pursue in the long run, or if you just need to refocus your attention to the other things in life that you've got going on. I know exactly how that goes, running a podcast, doing music, and all that sort of things. Like sometimes life just gets in the way and I got to put it down for a while, but I always come back to it.
For sure.
Well, by the time this episode comes out, you two will have probably recently tied the knot. So for everyone listening, go ahead down into the comment section and give congratulations to Caanan and Ella, the recent newlyweds.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Yeah, and guys, once again, it's been a pleasure having you on. I wish you a great rest of your night, rest of your week, rest of your year. Thank you once again for coming to Odd Virginia.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for having us. Hopefully we can talk again soon.
And there you have it. As Paul Harvey once said,
now you know the rest of the story.
That brings back fond memories of being a little kid, sitting passenger seat in my dad's Chevy S10, heading down to the 7-Eleven, going for some Slurpees, listening to AM talk radio along the way. Good times. May Mr. Harvey rest in peace. Now, it was a real privilege getting to talk to Caanan and Ella, and I hope that in their future they do more paranormal investigations and that we get to talk to them even more somewhere down the road. But for now, please show your appreciation. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think was in that graveyard, and please hit that like button, subscribe, become a supporter of the show. There are support links in the show notes. This interview has also got a few pictures associated with it, and I'll have a link to the pictures down in the show notes, some of which are transcripts that they got from the spirit box during the investigation of the graveyard. Pretty interesting stuff you might want to look at. Tell me what you think. But that's all that we got for a show tonight, everybody. I'm going to get out of here and start a rat beef with Vanilla Ice. Let's see if he's still got it. Stay Odd, Virginia.